Hi everyone, and welcome to this video where we look at another model in my classic computer collection. And today we're going to have a look at the Apple IIe. Now the Apple IIe was the computer that was never supposed to be. In the late 1970s, Apple had its Apple II line, it had the Apple II Plus, and the natural upgrade to the Apple II Plus was the Apple III, which was released in 1980. Now unfortunately, the Apple III suffered from a lot of reliability problems. And although Apple eventually fixed these, by the time they did, the damage had already been done. So Apple decided to go back to the drawing board and further enhance the Apple II line. And they came up with the Apple IIe. It was brought out early 1983. Now, it turned out the Apple IIe was actually one of the most enduring models in microcomputer history, lasting many, many years. So let's have a look at it. The Apple IIe was somewhat unique. At the time, it was one of the few models, maybe the only model, whose pricing and capabilities meant that it spanned markets. Now, what I mean by that is that it was capable enough for small business use, but it was also an open platform which you could tinker with. So it was great for hobbyists and those wanting to learn the fundamentals of how computers worked. It was also colour capable and had good graphics, so it was okay for playing those games at home. Lastly, the Apple IIe was backwardly compatible with the Apple II and Apple II Plus, which meant that there was a huge software library to draw on. In short, it was a very well supported, versatile and expandable platform. That said, schools were a significant market in North America, and Apple offered huge discounts to get them into the hands of teachers and school children. And it wasn't only in North America. Apple did that here in New Zealand too, although they had to share that space with machines like the New Zealand Poly, Commodore 64s, some Micro Bs, and even the Dick Smith System 80. It wasn't quite so easy to break into the school market in Britain, where the BBC Micro had staked out a lot of that educational territory. Now, one thing I've noticed in researching the Apple IIe is that it seems to have been a quiet achiever. Now, what I mean by that is that it's hard to find advertisements for it. In preparation for this video, I scoured our national computer magazine, New Zealand Bits and Bytes, from early 1983 to 1986, and there was not one advertisement for the Apple IIe. There were advertisements for the Apple IIc, and you can see one here on the cover of this issue, and there were advertisements for the Apple Macintosh, but the Apple IIe seemed to be a steady seller, at least here in New Zealand, that simply ran under the radar. What seemed to happen is that the Apple sales force would target schools, offering them bulk sales with big discounts, whereas advertising in the retail level to the general public wasn't really a priority. Now, I don't know for sure if this is the same in other countries, but I suspect it probably was. Here is one of the very few advertisements I did find on the web. It's a fairly plain-looking ad that highlights the features of the Apple IIe above and beyond those of the Apple II Plus. There was one other flyer I found which described the Apple IIe, but it shared the limelight in that ad with the Apple IIc. So, how about my own crop of Apple IIes? I've got 3 of them. Now, you might ask the question, does anyone need 3 Apple IIes? Well, probably not, but each one represents the major variant that appeared in the Apple IIe line. There are differences, so I decided to keep all the units as permanent members of the collection. A good place to start, perhaps, is with my Apple II Plus for comparison. So here's that unit, and here is the first of my Apple IIes. Note the different keyboard arrangement. The arrow keys are now at the bottom right, and the reset key is separated off from the rest of the keyboard up on the top right. The other keys have been made larger, and some have changed in other ways too. The power light's still there, except this time it's nestled amongst the bottom keys. Here's the model name and date on the circuit board, and you can see there that this unit was made in 1982. Now, given that the model was officially released early in 1983, this must have been one of the really early ones. Here is the circuit board. Now notice that large card in the middle. That's an 80-column RAM expansion card, taking advantage of the auxiliary slot in the middle of the circuit board there, which appeared in the IIe specifically for that purpose. And it did away with slot 0 found in the Apple II and the Apple II Plus. On to the next model now, and this is the Apple IIe Enhanced. I find it somewhat amusing that the E in Apple IIe stands for Enhanced anyway, so this model is an enhancement to the enhancement. On the outside it's exactly the same, except for these words on the power light saying that it's an enhanced model. Now these enhancements relate mostly to a few ICs and ROM changes which fixed bugs, improvement in the 80-column routines, and some added capability like mouse text, graphic characters. Here you can see this board hails from 1984. It's not in the greatest condition, but it works okay. And notice the electrolytic capacitors there, which are replacements for those earlier bullet types. Now those originals were blown when I first received this board, so it did need a bit of tender loving care from me to get it going. This is the main board, and now you can see that there's a smaller 80-column RAM expansion card in the auxiliary slot. These cards were standard in the later Apple IIes, like the Platinum. And speaking of the Platinum, here it is, my personal favourite. You can see the keyboard has had a major redesign with the addition of a numeric keypad. Also the reset key has been moved away to the upper left, and there's a few other cosmetic changes as well. There you can see the inscription telling us that this is an international NTSC version of the Platinum, designed for countries with 240 volts and PAL TV systems. So here is the main board itself. One of the chief differences on the board is that the 8 RAM chips in the previous models have been condensed into just 2. You can see these RAM chips on the lower right of the image. Now let me relate an experience with one of these boards to you. The first Apple IIe I got was an Apple IIe Enhanced model, or at least I thought it was. However, unbeknown to me, someone has swapped the internals, and it actually sported one of these Apple IIe Platinum mainboards. Now at one stage this IIe needed a repair. Now not knowing about the different variants of the Apple IIe, I collected diagrams and technical information off the web on the Apple IIe Enhanced, as you do, and I couldn't figure out why the documentation didn't seem to conform to the board I was working on. Anyway, eventually I realized what I had and what had happened, but it certainly confused me for a while. Now this board also has one of those mini 80-column 64K expansion cards, as you can see, and as I mentioned before, these were fitted as standard in the Apple IIe Platinum models. That's a Super Serial card behind it. Coming around the back, we can see an array of openings neatly plugged with plastic covers until they're needed. Now these holes take standard DB-type connectors, which can be connected to internal cards and screwed into the holes. The bottom left we can see the composite video RCA socket, cassette in out ports, and a joystick/game port. And to the right is the power socket and switch. It's interesting to compare this with a typical Apple II Plus case with its few open slots for cables. The joystick port is simply an internal socket in these earlier models. Okay, that about covers what I've got, so let's see the machines in action. Okay, so I've cleared some space on the bench, my very small bench or working desk, so I could line these 3 Apple IIes up. Nothing's happening at the moment, but we'll switch them on one at a time and fire them into life. So you can see there the 5 1/4 inch drives that were developed specifically for the Apple IIe. So this will get our Apple IIe Platinum up and going. Loaded a game into that. Apple Panic, I think it is. Yes, it is. So that's our Platinum fired up and working. So we'll come now to our Apple IIe Enhanced. I've got a mono screen attached to this one, and I've stacked up the floppy drives here so I can fit everything on the disk. So we'll put our floppy in. This one will load a diagnostic program for the Apple II Plus and IIe. I found these diagnostic programs very useful actually for determining what might be wrong with the machines if they seem to be misbehaving. So that's this one. Boot it up. You can see a menu of what you need to do there if you were going to do some diagnostic tests on the various components. And now we'll move on to our third machine. I've got a mono screen attached to this one as well. So this is our original or early version Apple IIe. You can see that by the way it booted up. It had that just said Apple II rather than Apple IIe, which shows it's an early version of the model. And this one is loading the operating system that came out for the Apple IIe, and that is ProDOS. Now originally the operating system for the Apple II line was DOS 3.3, not to be confused with MS-DOS 3.3, but DOS 3.3 was the common disk operating system. And when the Apple IIe came out with its extra capacity and memory, then a new operating system was also introduced, and that was ProDOS. And ProDOS has a lot of nice features built in. It's asking me now whether I would prefer the 80-column display, so I'll say yes, just so you can see that. And there we have ProDOS waiting for us to issue some commands. So all the machines are now fired up and working, and we can see them sitting there in a line, looking very nice with their screens all lit together. I have got a lot of software for the Apple IIe, but most of it's wrapped up in shrink wrap packaging, so I don't tend to use it. If I want software, I often get it off the net, and I use this program here, ADT Pro, which you can see here working, written by David Schmidt, and of great value to the vintage computer community. So if you're watching this, David, thanks very much for this package. It works wonderfully and is a great way to get internet disk images onto your real Apple. Okay, and I just want to show you a couple of programs really to illustrate the capability of the Apple IIe over and above the Apple II and Apple II Plus in terms of graphics and the various things it can do. So we'll start off with this game, and this game was recommended to me by one of the people on the Vintage Computer forums, and it's called California Games, and it only works on the Apple IIe because it uses enhanced graphics. And so here you can see the boot up screen. The built-in sound for the Apple IIe wasn't much to write home about. You could get some harmony notes, but generally if you wanted really good sound you had to have something like a Mockingbird card in the machine. But you can see there the graphics are quite reasonable, so let's try something. Now this is the first time I've used the machine, and I haven't got a joystick, so I'm going to be absolutely useless at these programs, and I'm sure not to get very far through it, but it just gives you an indication of the graphic capability. A lot like EGA graphics actually, so quite good, certainly enough to make graphical type games quite enjoyable. So quite difficult to operate this game. I'm trying to use the keyboard. It's obviously designed for a joystick, so as a BMX rider I'm not really getting very far. Let's see how I cope with the next obstacle. Well, circumnavigated the tyre, so up we go, and whoops, it fled on my face. It's asking me if I want to play again. It's got the default there, no, which probably indicates that I was so hopeless that it really doesn't think that I even should try again. This is another screen in the same game, and again it just shows you the sort of colour and graphics that you can get with the Apple IIe. You know, they're quite passable. Here it's asking me to select my team and select the game that I want to, event I want to compete in, so I'll select the BMX, the only one I've had experience with. But I'm not going to let you watch me play it, because being a raw novice I'm going to get nowhere, and I will be an embarrassment to the team. So we'll have a look at something else. What I want to do now is to have a look at some business software, just so you can see the Apple IIe in a different guise. This is Apple Works 2, and you can see I've swapped the screens, so we're now looking at a monochrome screen, but it gives the Apple IIe a whole different feel to it. We're now dealing with some business software. This is an integrated suite, and these integrated suites combined a database with word processor and a spreadsheet, all in the one package. And they were, they were a common piece of software back in the early mid-80s. So we can see this one's got a word processor. So here's our letter. I'll just put my own edits into this. Quite a capable package, but as well as a word processor, we can also load in a spreadsheet without swapping any disks. So this is a budget spreadsheet, so just change the salary here, and in fact we'll double it and see what happens. Spreadsheet, of course, like any spreadsheet on any computer, can be larger than the screen. Same with this one, so it's got a number of rows and columns. And finally, we've also got a database. So let's just load this in. This is a database of various items. And again, you can search through that, order it various ways, edit it if you need to. And we'll just edit the top line here from apples to pears. So something like Apple Works, Apple Works 2, which is the version of this particular package, made these machines very useful for small businesses also. Now I'll finish off this video as I usually do with a look at some of the literature I've got for the machine. So I've got 3 manuals for the Apple IIe. This is the owner's manual, quite a thick volume. And typical of Apple publications, it's very professionally made. It's well laid out. There are colour photos. Its illustrations are good, and it's on high quality paper. So very typical of the type of literature Apple put out with their machines. So that was the owner's manual. This is the ProDOS user's manual. And you can see there it says Apple II rather than Apple IIe, and that's because if your Apple II was expanded enough and had enough memory, it could run ProDOS, but it was really a disk operating system for the Apple IIe. It came out at the same time, and it was, if you like, the default DOS for that particular machine. And the third one is a ProDOS supplement to the Apple IIe owner's manual. So if you didn't have a ProDOS manual as such, you could get by and at least start your machine up and get it going with this quite slim volume that often came with the Apple II owner's manual. Again, all 3 manuals pretty nice to look at, high quality paper, well produced. So that's my take on the Apple IIe. Now, it wasn't as flashy as its cousin, the Macintosh, but it was a machine that essentially was the bread and butter of Apple during the mid-80s. It kept the money rolling in. It was a quiet, steady seller, and it had an enormously long run from early 1983 through to the end of 1993. That's a long time for any one computer model. So in that regard, it was very successful. And certainly, it's a model that deserves the title of classic computer. Well, thanks for joining me on that video looking at the Apple IIe and my particular Apple IIe models. No classic computer collection is complete without one of these. So until next time, I hope you keep well, and I'll see you in the next video.